And this is Michael Penate, and you're listening to an episode of the Spending Time podcast. I'm joined today by Zach Pina for another fun round of watch talk. How you doing, Zach?
Pretty good. How's it going, fam? Thanks for having me, as always.
Yeah, it's been a while since we talked, and a lot has happened. You've been on a couple trips. You've seen some cool watches, and today we're going to be talking about watches in the field and watches that are actually used and inspired by specific professions. So it's a huge part of watch marketing today, something that we both probably feel gets overly abused at times. But as we kind of plunge deeper into what the watch hobby is, we quickly learn to realize how watches are actually used in real professions. Say if you're a pilot or if you're a professional diver, we're just trying to discuss and uncover what using a watch actually is like.
Yeah, I really like this topic. I mean, I'm kind of a staunch advocate for, every watch, regardless of its purpose or intent, having at least 100 meters of water resistance, just so that I can feel like it can go wherever I want to go, wherever it needs to go. And I think if you look at most technical or sports watches, or watches that are designed to do specific things besides just tell time, or designed to go to specific places with their wearers, they're usually sport watches. And I think like this should be a really cool kind of ongoing series, I hope, because today I think on the menu we're talking about aviation watches, pilot watches. But there's a ton of other cool stuff out there, from dive to military-inspired stuff to racing watches, all kinds of interesting contexts where these products get used. And to your point, at the heart of that is certainly marketing, but it's really, really cool to witness firsthand when a product kind of eclipses the actual marketing and becomes the thing it was intended to be, and that's super neat to see.
Yeah, definitely. When a watch is just kind of well built as it is, without any sort of connection to a professional field, but it becomes this sort of icon,
Exactly.
just on its own.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the best kind of deal. I don't want to get right into watches, but the Breitling Aerospace is the first thing that comes to mind for me. I just feel like they wanted to build a cool watch, and it just became super popular with pilots. But there are a ton of fun pilot watches.
Yeah, there absolutely are. And I think it's funny. I actually am pulling my Aerospace out of the drawer and holding it now. And the thing that I really, really like about this watch is that I think originally they did say, hey, we made this thing specifically for people, and they kind of spelled it out who it was for. And I think this is probably the third or the fourth. The Aerospace Evo is the one that I have, so it's probably the third or the fourth generation, I think. But at this point, this watch is such an icon that Breitling doesn't really have to say who it's for anymore. Like, you see, and this is also one of those few watches where you take a stroll through pretty much any airport, just about anywhere in the United States or in Europe, and you're bound to see a few of these. And they're worn by pilots. They're worn by frequent flyer types. They're worn by kind of cruddy, like globe-trotting travelers, such as I often look like myself. So I don't know. This is a super cool piece. I'm glad you brought it up. I think it's the perfect way to kind of kick this thing off.
Before we get started, you want to do a fun wrist check? See what we're wearing right as we record this? Yeah,
and it's coincidental that I'm wearing a pilot watch today, so maybe I'll start off. But I'm wearing an IWC Spitfire UTC, and this was introduced, I think, in around 2000, in like the early 2011, 2012, early 2010s. It's roughly 5-6 years old. I found it NOS. It's been discontinued. This kind of predates the Kern era, as we've come to call it. But I really, really like this piece. It has an independently adjustable hour hand, a UTC aperture at 6 o'clock, so it shows 24-hour time there, and then a date at 3. Silver dial, applied numerals. This is a super, super cool piece. I'd been chasing one in pretty good condition for a while, and finally found one, literally with box papers, stickers. It actually still had the warranty card that was undated but stamped to a jeweler down here in the South Bay, so it worked out really nice. How about you?
Very cool. Coincidentally, I think I'm wearing the same watch that I was wearing last time we chatted. I threw it on this morning. It's kind of the easiest watch for me to just pick up and wear, and it's the Doxa Sub 300 black lung. Yeah. Yeah, I'm diving is something that can definitely weave its way into this series, and I'm not a diver, but my wife and I were we got like the books, and we're scheduling our pool sessions and stuff like that. So hopefully, little by little, maybe I can actually put this thing to good use.
I'm glad you're doing it that way. I gotta say, if I were to give any advice to anyone who is thinking about doing what you're doing and thinking about taking the plunge and going to the classes and doing all that to get certified, do it with your partner.
We're both super stoked.
That's great.
She's actually been really pushing for it.
Oh, good. Okay. Good.
But this thing is,
you're gonna end up in
incredible. It's kind of the archetypal dive watch.
No, it absolutely is, and that kind of dovetails along with what we're, the topic of this conversation and watches in the field. I mean, that's one of the original watches in the field as used by, the Cousteaus and many kind of aquanauts of many eras and generations. But that dive watch has been there since the very beginning of sport diving. So that's the genesis right there.
Yeah, definitely, and it's something about it, as quirky as it is. It's just like bright orange and totally bananas in every way. It's just so easy to wear and just so fun. It's not even like my most expensive watch, but it's definitely the one I've grown super attached to.
That's awesome to hear. Yeah, I think the watches that give you the most joy are the ones that don't necessarily have to be the most expensive, but they just make sense,
For sure. Yeah. So I think probably the one recent event that kind of sparked this discussion or inspired us to take this route is you recently kind of wrapping up a trip with Hamilton, and just seeing the way watches are worn out in the field by these professionals doing some totally crazy stuff in airplanes. So you want to give us a primer on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So without kind of giving away too much of the story, we were out in Fort Worth at the Texas Motor Speedway for the final chapter of the Red Bull Air Race. So it's a 8-race series that goes all around the world. Basically, it's kind of like the F1 or the NASCAR of airplanes, if there's a really dumb way of stripping it down. Everybody flies the same airplane, has the same engine, same body, same prop, and then the guys are allowed to customize any other aspect on the airplane. They race around a series of air-filled pylons, these kind of air-filled towers around the course, and they just do it as fast as they can. And the goal is to fly past or through each set of pylons as quickly and as level as possible. So it's sort of a mix of speed and precision, because if you enter the course too fast, if you pull too many G's, which is a safety issue, if you pass around one of the pylons and your aircraft isn't fully level with the horizon, or if you nick one of the pylons, you're docked seconds off your time, and so the course laps are between 50 seconds and a minute. So it's pretty sweet. It's really spectator friendly. The tension kind of gets ratcheted up as the day goes on. Races are won and lost by thousandths of a second. It's really very cool. I kind of went into it with a little bit of I didn't really know a ton about the sport. I watched a fair amount of YouTube videos and stuff going into it, but it was really, really very cool, and I came away from the weekend with a kind of a newfound appreciation for the precision that these guys have. I mean, not only do these guys have huge balls, but they have incredible reflexes, but also the ability to the ability to subject yourself to the G-forces that they do and still being able to make these kind of razor quick decisions is really, really impressive. So I mean, it's a super niche sport, really unique. But we were there because Hamilton Watches is the official sponsor of the Red Bull Air Race, and they have been for the last 2 years. So it was really cool. They have 4 sponsored pilots, 4 pilot ambassadors essentially. One of whom, who's been with the brand for a number of years, flies a Hamilton branded plane, and then the other 3 just fly various planes but wear Hamilton watches. And we actually went up in the air with one of the pilots. And stick around. By the time this podcast airs, hopefully that story should be very close to publishing. So I'm really excited for you guys to read it.
Nice. And there's this I've actually never been to one of these air races. Is this kind of in uncontrolled airspace, or are these guys talking to air traffic at all? You know, is it I guess is it around like 1,200 feet? Where how far up are they?
Yeah, it was pretty it's super low. So I get the sense that you have much more aviation experience than I do. I have very little.
Yeah.
So when you said 1,200 feet, I think that was actually really close to the window that we were flying, and I think it was around 1,500 to 2,000. It was pretty low.
Okay.
One thing that was really cool, and again, not trying to give away the story completely, but we did have throughout the duration of our flight, which was about 25 minutes, we had, I could hear the pilot and I were able to talk to each other, but we could also hear all of the air traffic that was going on as well. And I do know that during the air race, it's closed airspace. Pretty much they had the Texas, the Texas Motor Speedway, which is freaking huge. I've been to a few NASCAR tracks, but I've never seen that one, and that one is just epically massive. I mean, it's just like it could not be more like hashtag America than you can possibly imagine in this giant racetrack in the middle of the. Anyway, so the air race occupies the airspace above the motor speedway, which again is massive, and then kind of the zone around it. But the runway is in the middle of the speedway, so they taxi, take off from the middle of the speedway. They kind of fly out a little bit, and they just circle the airspace in and around. So essentially, I think they call it a box, and the box that the pilots are able to fly in it's around 2,000 feet, I think, is the ceiling. And the lowest they go at around 200 miles an hour, or 230K, I think, for our European audience. 300K, 330? Mm-hmm. That's going to be wrong. Somebody's going to call us on that. But
it's 40, part of the
internet. It is, yeah. 40 feet off the ground is the lowest. And 80 feet is the height of the pylons. So most of the course takes place between that 40 to 80 foot window, unless they are exiting the course and circling back, or pulling like a massive loop to because they do 2 laps on the course. They do a lap around it, and kind of like a swimmer, when the swimmer gets to the end of the pool and flips over and then goes back the way he came, they do the same thing. They get to the end of the course and they pull this massive loop-de-loop, and then they shoot back through the course the way they came. And in that massive loop, they have to keep the G load under, I think it was under 12 Gs, and which is, I would come to find out, 12 Gs is a lot. And military pilots can get upwards of that. But when you look at these planes, which are, they're glorified lawnmowers, it's a small single-engine plane. It's fully manual. There's no automation in it whatsoever. It's just like the yoke and the instruments. It's super neat. Nice. So yeah, there's a lot of skill and precision there. But to answer your question in a super roundabout way, they have a box. It's about the size of the motor speedway. So
cool. Well, speaking about the G's and all the sort of stress that you go through when you're up there, you kind of think about the tools and the instruments you have when you're kind of flying around doing what you're doing, whether you're a commercial aviation pilot or a military pilot, and you think about what has been built into pilot watches ever since they were born, essentially. And I think one of the primary features is just construction that's built to withstand that kind of stress, whether it's from pressure deviations or just massive G-forces. So kind of in practicality, can we sort of summarize the basics of a pilot watch and what a person would need if they're a flat out professional?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think like you said, the drops in pressure is absolutely one. G-force is another one, and again, like a quick primer on G-force is that, like, where you're sitting right now in your seat recording this is essentially 1 G. That's one. The gravitational force is you again and the ground, and a G-forces are incurred in not speed but in acceleration or deceleration. So if you were to be slapped in the face, a slap in the face measures G's very, very briefly, but it's an acceleration and deceleration of that moment of impact. Also, if you were to swerve to avoid a deer or something on the road in your car, well, G-forces are at work there. Same thing applies in these smaller planes where you're going, literally, I mean, the max speed of these planes, I think, is around 220 or 230 miles an hour. And so, if you're going flat out and they're whipping through a chicane or something and the plane whips, vertical and then horizontal again and then vertical again, all three of those turns in quick succession incur various G-forces. So the watch needs to be able to, the watch should be able to handle or exceed what a human can handle or exceed, essentially. And so I've been doing a fair amount of reading on NASA tests because, in order for a Speedmaster to be flight qualified, it has to be put in a centrifuge. And part of the reason that automatic watches, this is part of my understanding, is that the reason automatic watches didn't make that test is because they didn't pass the centrifuge test, whereas the manual did. So part of it was operation in G-force, and part of it was also like the resistance to that spinning effect. And I think 40 G's is what they test it to, and 40 is an obscene number, and a human has gone. So I wish I don't actually have the page pulled up, but there was a fella in the 50s that I think he was tested to 45, and somebody feel free to email or comment if I'm not going to search while we're doing this, but he basically just like strapped himself to some rockets, and it was the acceleration. It was very brief, but they say I think it was measured to 45. But anyway, the punchline is that if you were to eject from a fighter jet, that's around 20 G's, and that can be permanently damaging if you exit the aircraft wrong. So 20 is an extreme event. 10 is the maximum, around the maximum window of what they see kind of in this Red Bull Air Race scenario. So the punchline here, I think, is that we've seen watches like the Bremont, the MB series, MB1, MB2, and MB3. Yep. So those were tested to survive an ejection. So at least 20 G's. So that's an automatic watch. And I do remember it was either Nick or Giles saying that. That was a challenging watch for them to make because it's an automatic watch, and that's an extreme amount of G-force. So. So I think these Hamilton watches, they're not tested to 20 G's, but they can survive essentially what the pilot can feasibly survive. And in this particular environment, we can safely say that like all these guys are wearing automatic watches, some chronographs, some quartz, some freehand. 10, 15 G's is no problem for an automatic watch. And I think that's a pretty safe window. It's a pretty safe thing to assume that it doesn't have to be like a specially regulated or customized movement to be able to survive that kind of force.
Yeah, I love the MB series, and I hope to own one day, actually.
Yeah, they're super cool. Another thing that Bremont does that's interesting, and I think this dovetails into what other pilot watches can be tested as, all of the MBs are 200-meter water resistant. And I understand that water resistance is not important for a pilot. This IWC I'm wearing right now is 60 meters, 6 ATM. But it has a screwed-on crown. It shouldn't be neglected. No, it shouldn't be. It has a screwed-on crown, and I swim with it. So I feel okay about that. This is the lowest water resistance of any watch that I own. But Bremont actually tests the MB to resist salt fog, which I thought was interesting. But the reason for that is because they wanted the watch to be able to be deployed by deck crew, so like aircraft carrier guys who are out there actually in like literal salt fog. So this watch has undergone some interesting anti-corrosion tests to resist that kind of environment. So it's a pilot watch per se, but it's not just for pilots. And I think they've made a great point of making their watches more like broadly purpose-built for like armed forces, which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, it's just maybe because I've never worked in the military sector, but all of the pilots that I love everything that goes into building a modern pilot watch today, and brands like Bremont are doing amazing things, Hamilton as well. But the thing is, every time I've interacted with a pilot, be they, ex-military or, flight instructor, they're always just down with wearing the Citizen Eco dress, something like a Navy Hawk. I can't tell you how many of those busted but still working Blue Angels citizens I've seen out, in general aviation.
Yeah. I mean, for every aerospace that I've seen on the wrist of like a flight looking guy, I've seen 10 of those Navihawks. I mean,
yeah, of course.
But to be fair, I mean, it's a great looking watch. It does universal time. I mean, they're super accurate. I think it's radio controlled variants. I've never owned one, but I know that if you're looking for an affordable kind of no nonsense like quartz watch that could serve as like a really good tool watch, I think that's a perfect example of something that actual fighter pilots and pilot type people wear, and B, like, I mean, justifiably so. It's affordable. It looks pretty cool. It kind of looks the part. I mean, really.
This is kind of fun also. I flew to Hong Kong not long ago for the Hong Kong Watch and Clock Fair, and in Aviation, a flight attendant was wearing a GMT Master.
Oh, nice.
And when I saw that, I feel like I was instantly transported to that romantic 50s era when the watch was being marketed as something that was really worn by the entire crew. It wasn't just for the pilots as we kind of see it today. You know, if you're flying the Concorde tomorrow, you're gonna wear a GM. You know,
right. Yeah, I mean, weren't the Pan Am air crews like equipped with them or something? I'm not fully up to my history on that, but yeah. But I mean,
I think by 54 or 53 they were kind of getting out there in circulation.
Okay, that sounds about right. So in your mind, what makes for a pilot watch? Because I certainly have my own criteria, and then I think once we've kind of established what our personal criteria are, it would be cool to talk about a few more examples of what these guys are actually wearing.
So really, in the field, at least with the pilots that I've worked with, they were all super excited about the watches they would fly with when they had some kind of additional functionality, mostly with a slide rule bezel.
Oh, interesting.
Or what we call sometimes like a whiz wheel, you know, where you can make some additional calculations with fuel and wind correction angle, which actually I think the Hamilton Crosswind will do as well. That's they have like a wind correction angle bezel.
That's exactly correct. And it's honestly, I think it's even more complicated than the than the Navi timer.
Yeah.
It's has no fewer than 2 rotating internal bezels, two different rotating bezels.
So something that's really something that has that kind of extra functionality in the bezel, and maybe something that will get you another time zone. But you know, a lot of the guys working day to day, if you're a CFI, a certified flight instructor, you're not really thinking about multiple time zones. But I guess if you're flying, you know, within the U.S. at least, you want at least the ability to track a second time zone with your bezel.
Right.
You know, even you don't even need to have a GMT hand.
Yep.
I think about like the old Benrus pilot / dive watches with just the 12-hour or something like a Halios C4.
Yep, those are great examples. And I think that speaks to the fact that you know, simplicity reigns. I think, you know, tool and gadget nerds always love to see, and that to me is kind of the downfall of like the Citizen, is there's like it's all the things all at once, and that's also to me like I love how iconic the Navi timer is, but at the same time like it's just a little bit too much. And for me, like I mean that is a pilot instrument, or at least it was at some point. But like that's part of why I love the aerospace Evo that I have, because it's a quartz movement, but it would be perfect if it had a 12-hour bezel, I will say. I mean, it has a pretty standard like dive style 60-minute unidirectional bezel, which is a little odd for this. But it has a quick set hour hand, and so you pop the crown out one position and you flick the crown, and the hour and the minute hand whizzes all the way around the dial in 60-minute increments to set to the next hour. It's super slick. And to me, the most important thing is not so much a second time zone, because I can usually do pretty quick math in my head, like, you know, right now Geneva's 8 hours up, or Michigan's 3 hours up, or New York, or whatever. But it's super important to me that I can just adjust it really quickly when I land. And, you know, whether you're bouncing through a couple different time zones or or whatever. So that's why I love this IWC, is that it has that quick set hour hand. It does have the 24-hour window, which is handy, but at the same time, like, so I mean, if you're a pilot, if you're an actual pilot, to me, the function that you're using the most, or that you would prefer in your watch to have, is the ability to set itself either autonomously when you land via like a Seiko Astron, which I've seen a few pilots wear, or something like this, where it's just a quick manipulation of the crown. And in some cases, you don't even, I mean, it's in a perfect world, you wouldn't even have to take the watch off your wrist. You just adjust it really quickly.
Yeah, I've had to spend some time, you know, because I can't say I've ever been in the market for an original GMT master. It's just kind of not really in my range, to be honest. But if I understand correctly, something like the original 1675, it just had that extra hand geared as a 24-hour hand. So if you wanted the second time zone, you turned the bezel. I could be wrong, but
yeah,
I think
earlier
that's
versions
how
of it.
worked.
Yep, that's exactly correct.
Yeah, and you don't even have to take it off your wrist.
No.
So I'd actually argue that as a professional, you know, a watch in the field, that's something that I would prefer if I was a professional pilot.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. No, I don't disagree. And I mean, you know, you look at what Bremont is doing, you know, going back to watches in the field and professional pilots, and and what Breitling's done with the aerospace and other watches. I mean, that original model of Swiss watch companies, you know, making sure that the, you know, pilots and industry professionals were wearing their product goes way back. I mean, that's a tradition that's not new to the industry by any means. I mean, you know, we're speaking about you know, how the original Pan Air, I keep wanting to say Pan Air, the Pan Am flight crews. I mean, there are Pan Am branded GMT masters, are there not? I feel like I've seen.
There probably are,
Yeah,
to be honest.
I'm not up on.
If there's a Domino's Rolex out there, there's probably a Pan Am one.
There has to be. I'm searching for that right now. GMT master. There has to be the legendary albino. No Pan Am logo. Huh.
Oh, I feel like I've heard of that one.
Yeah, this is a real thing. It doesn't have the logo, but I think it was specifically issued to flight crews. Anyway, the fact remains that, like, it is very cool that these watches get issued, and I know that Breitling has, I don't know if they still do, but they used to, had like a military purchase program, because I feel like I've seen, you know, there are pricing structures that are reserved specifically for, you know, flight crews of certain airlines. It was the same thing with Bremont. Like, they have a military purchase program.
Yeah, I know you can commission them to
exactly.
make something for your squadron.
Exactly, yeah. And relatively affordable, given sort of the final MSRP. But yeah, so I mean, they're definitely in a position to encourage that kind, because I mean, at the end of the day, your end user kind of dictates. You know, the perfect example of your end user, I think, ultimately kind of informs who else is going to be buying your watches. And I'm not a military pilot, but if I knew that military guys were actually wearing one, I would certainly take that product more seriously, knowing that it was sort of dependent upon by that. So I think kind of on that note, like, seeing all of, like, going back to this Hamilton Red Bull thing and seeing all of the watches that the actual pilots chose to wear, to me was really interesting, because they were allowed to choose anything from within, like, the khaki aviation collection. And it was, to me, it was really interesting to see what they chose and why they chose those specific watches. And, you know, as you guys will see in some of the photographs and stuff that are going to go into this story, like, all four of the pilots wore something very different, which I thought was really, really cool. And Nicholas Ivanov, who is he's the pilot of the Hamilton branded plane, the orange plane. He was actually wearing the watch that's on the tail of his plane, and which is pretty sweet. I thought that was cool. I gotta check that out. And that watch is a couple years old, and I don't think it's in the current collection anymore. It's a khaki chronograph. It's a great looking chronograph. I think it's part of the X-Wind collection. It's not X-Wind or Crosswind or Crosswind. Everybody says it X-Wind, which.
Is it X-Wind? I thought it was Crosswind.
I thought it was Crosswind as well, and that made the most sense. But I heard several people from Hamilton say X-Wind, which
Oh, okay.
Unless they unless they misspoke. I think crosswind is better, but anyway. So I thought that was super neat. Another pilot, and I think we actually have a sponsored post that's up on aBlogtoWatch right now. Maybe that can go in the show notes or something. From April, when Hamilton announced this particular partnership, they have photographs of all the pilots and some of the watches that they're wearing. That could be cool to reference. But another one of the pilots, this fella who's from Canada, he actually got his start. He's been a bush pilot in kind of remote Canada for much of his young life, and he grew up flying fast and low. And I mean, he has this he has this almost like Luke Skywalker personality to him. I mean, just growing up flying speed. Like flying speeders around or whatever and crop dusting. Like he totally has that vibe. And now he's this this badass aerobatics pilot, which I thought was super cool. And his choice was he was wearing the khaki. So the crosswind or the X-wind also has like a 3-hand day date version that's in all black. And that was his choice because it was simple and kind of badass. It does have a rotating bezel that he liked that. He could operate it with gloves. He said it kind of stays out of the way. It's pretty low profile for a 3-hander. So that was his choice. But by far the most interesting choice from all 4 of the pilots that we chatted with was the Italian. His name was Dario. And actually he was the newest addition to the team. And he was wearing another watch that actually I think has been out for a year or two, and I'm sure you've seen this, but it's called the Takeoff. It's the Hamilton khaki. I think it's also an X-wind, but it's called the Takeoff. And the idea is that it's a chronograph. It's a 3-hand. It's a traditional chronograph, but it mounts to the special locking plate on your wrist. And you can actually uncouple the locking mechanism and remove the watch head, so it looks kind of like a stopwatch in your hand. It completely separates. But the kicker, because when he showed that to me, I've seen that watch before, and I was like, oh, cool, you're wearing the Takeoff, and we started chatting about it, and he said, yeah, I have a mount for it on my other plane, and I was like, what? And he pulls out his phone and he shows me a couple photos of the instrument panel on his personal plane. So the plane that was in front of us was like the Red Bull media plane, the 2-seater. So his actual single seat stunt plane that he uses for racing has a custom instrument panel, and on the panel, so the watch ships clipped to the strap, in a traditional way, you wear it on your wrist, but it also ships with a special bracket mount with screws that you can physically mount it to your instrument panel. So he showed me a photo of, so he gets in the plane and he takes the watch off his wrist, and then he mounts it to the instrument panel, and then like starts the chronograph for his flight time and stuff like that. And I just thought that, I mean, it's such, the reason it's brilliant is not so that you can see what time it is. It's because when it's on your wrist and you're pulling, I can't say we did more than 6 Gs because we weren't allowed. I mean, there's a note on the dash, on his dash, that was like, with passenger, can't go over 6 Gs. So we pulled exactly 6 Gs, and I didn't black out, but it was the most intense like roller coaster ride of my entire life. He goes all the way up to 10 or 12, but when you're doing that, you can't see your wrist. You can barely move your head, and I think, with so much going on in the cockpit for these guys, if he needs to quick reference something, there's a number of redundancies in there, and timekeeping is one of them. So being able to pull the watch off your wrist and mounting it to the instrument panel, it's such a neat touch, and it's one that I don't think any other brands offer this kind of a product, and 2, it's so hyper specific to so few people. I think that's what makes it even more awesome. That it has this feature that literally nobody will use, but the few people who do use it, I mean, it just galvanizes to me that these rad, like, purpose-built products are truly like for very specific types of people. Because I think for us, it's really easy as desk divers or as desk pilots or what have you to look at something and be like, that's silly, I would never use that. But to me, like, that just makes it that much cooler. I mean, I'm never going to use it, but the fact that it exists for somebody special is really, really interesting.
Yeah, of course. And you can, in aviation at least, you can see watches span across that entire range of something that's totally purpose built and something that, you know, is still reliable but feels totally out of place. I mean, Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier with like an Oyster Perpetual on his wrist.
Right,
it was just it wasn't even like a sub. It was just like off the shelf.
Yep.
And he probably wore it just because it worked. So kind of my favorite pilot watch that I've ever seen in real life was an old instructor I had, and he flew. It was always fun to get yelled at by this guy. He flew. He actually flew A4s with John McCain. Whoa. Apparently, I don't know if that was a big fish story, but you know, he didn't seem like that kind of guy. But you know, he's kind of up there in age now, and he still flies. And he just, I kind of wish I would have clarified whether or not he wore this on missions, but he just had this Timex, man, on like an expansion on an expansion bracelet. Your typical
the
granddad
Speedo
watch.
flex.
Exactly. So you know what, man? G-forces, pressure drops. I think pilots, like divers or any other professional in the field, just want something that works. Which is kind of cool to see how everyone takes that different approach.
Very true. Very true.
I do like that feature of mounting that clock on the on the dash, because today with especially in aviation, you have something called glass cockpits, which is basically like these huge screens in the cockpit. You get everything you need. You know, a ton of different clocks as well. So putting that up there where you can see it right away is definitely a cool feature.
Yeah.
Because one pilot that I used to fly with, he had a Citizen. I used to always notice that he would flip the watch so it was on the inside of his wrist. You know, kind of like what a driver would do. So that Hamilton, I would say, has a slightly more elegant approach.
That's pretty cool. You know, I've seen a lot of military operators do the same thing, because if you're holding your rifle, let's say, so if you're right-handed and you're holding your rifle with your left hand on the what is it, the stock or whatever, you know, down the barrel. If the watch is on the inside of your wrist, and then if you put your eye sort of where the scope or the sights would be, you can't actually read the time. You can see what time it is. You know, at a glance without having to move your wrist. So I think that's definitely like a military kind of wilderness maneuver for people who are familiar with shooting firearms. That's one thing they might do. So he might have been a gun guy as well on the side.
Very cool. Well, man, I mean, this has been fun. I can't wait to see all the other stuff you got to do. I'm kind of jealous.
Yeah, it was a really neat trip. But I mean, this was such a perfectly timely topic, because as watch fans, like we love seeing watches that we recognize in the field. But two, you know, as gear nerds too, it's really cool to see all of these really crazy, like, purpose-built tools that really only do one thing, but they're designed to do it really, really well. And I think within the context of the air race, for me, it was really neat to see. I mean, these airplanes are essentially. I mean, this is a bit of a stretch. I tried to get one of the pilots to say this specifically so I could have the pull quote, but he didn't, because he didn't agree with me. But but the planes are very analog in the way that a mechanical watch is. I mean, they're almost backwards in a sense that there's no automation. The electronics are super minimal. I mean, their plane is sort of the mechanical watch, or the analog equivalent to like a highly automated, like a Learjet or something that has autopilot and all of the electronics and the systems and everything. So it is. I don't know. I think I might have missed the point a little bit, but I think I think we were on the same wavelength in a sense that we appreciate these kinds of things that they're purpose built. Two, they're simple. But three, you know, they are a little bit romantic in that they are analog and require a very specific type of person to be able to handle them or manage them or appreciate them. I think that's super neat.
And that's the best part about watches, the romanticism, and probably what continues to pull us in.
This is very true.
As we try to make connections with the past while still looking forward to the future.
Couldn't say it better myself.
Well, Zach, this has been fun. I think it's probably a good time to sign off, and hopefully people enjoyed the episode. And I actually look forward to seeing if we can make this an ongoing series where we try to just get together for a quick discussion about watches in the field, whether you're a diver, pilot, military personnel. It could be fun.
Yeah,
so,
no, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I would love to hear what our audience wants to, the types of watches that they've either seen in the field or they want us to talk about more. I mean, I know as an ongoing series, I think this could be a lot of fun for folks that like to get out there. So I'm also very excited about this.
Yeah, by all means, if you're a professional out there, and if you're a pilot, if you're in the military, if you're in a police force, SWAT, I mean, these are all places that we like to learn about. Even if you're a medical professional,
absolutely.
There are some preferences for watches. So
absolutely.
Until next time, I think we can sign off now. Thank you guys so much for listening. Zach, I'll let you take it away with the sign off, and then I'll wrap it up.
Yeah, no, good stuff, Michael. Thank you so much for having me. And like I said, by the time this airs, we should have a great story, a more comprehensive story about the Red Bull Air Race, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with everybody. So, thanks again for listening.